Mad, Bad and Dangerous, a celebration of difficult women. This is a series of interviews between influential women over 70 years of age. My name is Emma O'Grady. I'm an artist and I make work inspired by true events, real lives and shared histories. I believe that by sharing experiences we can change our world in profound, tiny ways. I embarked on this journey to pay tribute to these extraordinary women, to create a space for them to speak publicly with their peers and ultimately learn from them how to become more difficult.
Until the battle of the sexes has finally become unknown, until nature has stopped being treated as the enemy of man, when comfort is no longer mistaken for culture and beauty becomes a need.
She was a minister, wasn't she, for a while?
Yeah, not a bad one.
No. What was she the minister for?
I can't remember.
All right. Listen here, the fact that we're sitting here at all is a miracle. So let's leave pushing our luck. Don't push your luck. Sit back into your chair and be comfortable. Or, you know, just do whatever you like. It doesn't matter the time.
Lelia, are you going to talk about John Schrage-Frueh today?
No, leave that out. We are simply going to start and talk about your life.
Lelia Doolan was born in 1934. She is a film and theatre director, producer, actor, journalist and activist. Lelia began working at RTE in the 1960s. By age 27, she was directing The Reardons, and soon after founded 7 Days, the precursor to primetime. She co-authored a book, Sit Down and Be Counted, following her resignation from RTE over their commercial policies. In 1971, she became the first female artistic director of the Abbey Theatre since Lady Gregory.
I was trying to match the aims that the theatre has to our resources and to the requirements of the audience at the moment. In other words, I was trying to bring into what I hope is going to be a creative fusion, actor, audience and author. Consequently, we decided in the first year to do classics and revivals so that the audience and the actors and writers could see how fine our heritage is and how great the work in this field has been. In the second and third years, this would then launch us forth, I felt, on new fields of endeavour. And at the same time that we will have in the Peacock an opportunity to provide the actor and the writer, and to a certain extent the audience, with an opportunity to consider other forms of work, experiment, look into poetic playwriting and into Irish play.
Lelia has a PhD in anthropology and also has qualifications in the Irish language, in science and in homeopathy. She established Ireland's first course in media communications in Rathmines College, now DIT. Michael D. Higgins appointed her chairperson of the Irish Film Board when it reconstituted in 1993. She co-founded the Galway Film Fleadh and the Cinemobile. She was part of the BYRNE Action Group against the building of an interpretive centre in Mullaghmore, ending up in the High Court successfully preventing the build and resulting in fundamental change to Irish planning legislation. She has joined in the protests against the use of Shannon Airport by US military, the Corrib gas pipeline, and lent her support to the Equal Marriage campaign and Repeal the Eighth. Her contribution to the artistic and cultural life of Ireland is nothing short of groundbreaking. Most recently, she was involved in the reopening of Yeats's Tower, Tourballylee, and spearheaded the building of Galway's art house cinema, the Picture Palace. 2011 saw the premiere of her critically acclaimed and award-winning documentary about Bernadette McCalliskey called Bernadette, Notes on a Political Journey.
I'm teaching myself now to listen to the Angelus, you know, the bong bong.
Yeah?
What's that called? That's called here and now. No.
What's it called?
Mindfulness.
Oh.
The Angelus bell rings, I think, 17 times every time it's midday.
19, even.
How would you know 19?
Somebody said it once.
Ah.
Yeah, I could be dead wrong. It might be 17.
I could be dead, right?
Nell McCafferty was born in 1944 and grew up in the Bogside in Derry. She is a journalist, author and civil rights campaigner. She was involved in the civil rights movement of the 1960s in the north of Ireland. She is probably Ireland's most well-known feminist and is a much-loved public figure. Her work and her voice have been crucial in creating the changes we have seen in Irish society over the last 50 years. In 1969, she began writing a column for the Irish Times called In the Eyes of the Law and reported on events in the Bridewell courts in Dublin. She never named defendants, but always named the judges. It was published 5 days a week and it ran for 8 years.
Now, you have an image of being a very, very aggressive little lady, are you?
I don't think I'm personally aggressive, certainly not to my friends or to people who are having a hard time. But I do find that I certainly get angry in certain topics, which is the question of poverty and the general condition of this country. And under such conditions, when I'm talking about these things, it would be ludicrous to do a song on that dance act. There's nothing happy or beautiful about people suffering. I'm aggressive against institutions and bosses, certainly.
When people see you on television, on discussion shows and so on, you sometimes do get very, very angry, and that puts them off.
I think the only people who are put off are people who would object to what I'm saying, whose best interests I threaten. Certainly I haven't found reaction when I walk about the streets and talk to ordinary people that they're put off. In fact, they're all in there saying you should have given them more money.
Does your work, particularly your work in the courts, make you very, very bitter?
It makes me more depressed than bitter, just because of the total agony of the human condition that we see here. It makes me bitter against the bosses or people in authority who are doing this to people, and who, at no stage, as far as I can see, really show any understanding of what's going on or any sympathy for it. There's a total authoritarian concept in this country of the bosses talking to the people down below, a demand for obedience, a demand for conformity, and an absence of sympathy.
She was a founding member of the Irish Women's Liberation Movement in 1970. When the IWLM formed, the marriage bar was still in place, meaning in many cases women had to leave their jobs after marriage. Marital rape was not a crime. Women were paid less than men for equal work. Women had to opt in for jury duty. Women could not choose their own official place of domicile. Women could not collect the children's allowance, and homosexuality and divorce was illegal. Nell once talked about the time she bought a bed on hire purchase and had to get a man to sign for her. The Irish Women's Liberation Movement manifesto, Chains or Change, was delivered to the people of Ireland on the Late Late Show. Taoiseach Garret FitzGerald left his home to go to RTE and intervene in the debate. This significant moment in Irish women's history is unavailable to view because RTE wiped the tapes. Her 1981 book, The Armagh Women, was about 30 Republican women in Armagh jail who endured the dirty protest for 10 months. It sold well for 2 weeks, and then was suddenly withdrawn because of a libel suit, and the books were pulped. A number of copies were saved and illicitly sent to Canada, from where they are still sold today. Among her many books and publications, her 1985 book, A Woman to Blame, The Kerry Babies Case, is seen as one of the most important critiques there is of how Irish society was at the time. It described the events surrounding the Kerry Babies case as a model for Irish male attitudes to women. She won her only Jacobs Award for her reports on the Italia 90 World Cup for the Pat Kenny Show on RTE Radio 1. She stated in her autobiography, "It was the first and only one of my life, for football, for celebrating Irish men." In her acceptance speech, she said she looked forward to an end to the broadcasting ban which kept Sinn Féin off the airwaves. She published her autobiography, Nell, in 2004 and spoke directly for the first time about being a lesbian. It ends with the words, "The best is yet to come. While we await that glorious day, the sensible response is to laugh and be a disorderly woman." Today, she sits down in her kitchen to speak with her friend Lelia Doolan.
Mad, bad and dangerous. Mad, bad and dangerous.
Can we begin?
Oh,
Maybe start.
All right, women,
Can we go?
you can go.
Gorgeous are great. Nell, hello darling, you look great. How are you? Don't
Rita,
answer
thank
that.
you. Great
It's
compared
great to
to.
see-
I love it when people say I look great. I say compared to what?
Well, never mind. Compared to what they thought you ought to be, perhaps. I mean, there are people who say, "Oh God, is she still alive?" And I once met a man coming over the bridge in Galway who said to me, I know your face. You used to be Lelia Doolan. I said, yes, that's right. Nell, I want to talk about your book. It is, to me, one of the great documents of the age, I must say. I think it is a very wise and wide-ranging, beautiful book. It tells from your earliest days of the family in Elmwood Street, and
Beechwood Street, yes.
Beechwood Street, and
Yes.
that entire community of women. Your mother was a most remarkable woman. I remember her well. Talk a little bit about your early time there, because the book starts in a very arresting way about your remembering a woman in the street who was protected when she was pregnant by all of the other women who looked after her. She was the daughter of one of the women in the street.
That's right, and she hadn't told anyone she was pregnant.
Exactly. And then her mother came and knocked on all of the doors and
great.
said to everybody, my daughter is pregnant. And,
Yeah.
and you wondered in your own way then why you couldn't go or have your mother knock on the doors and tell the people that you were gay.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was a most interesting and wonderful way, because I do think the book, not only, I mean, is it a great history of a time and of your life and your feelings, but it's also a, complete insight into the poverty, the penury, the difficulties of Catholic nationalists in Derry.
I don't know about poverty.
Well, you were lucky, but you talk about there being a lot of people who were poorer than your family. Your father was working.
Yeah, my father had 3 jobs. He got a job in the bookies at night, at the top of the street, and he went to the bookies then 5 nights a week, plus his own job.
And what was his own job?
He was a clerk in the civil service, running a United Nations naval base at the time when we were in the United Nations, and he was distributing oil or filling the tankers when they came in to Derry, to Lissaholly. And I was good at arithmetic, and he kept explaining to me, God help him, how much, we're talking about volume of water that went into the tanks and the volume that came out, and I could not work it out. He was well disappointed in me.
Were you never a mathematician?
I was great at arithmetic, but I just couldn't work out volumes.
Oh well, there you are. This is a different thing. What was he like as a father?
My book dodges a lot of that. In my book, Nell, the autobiography, at one stage I put in a sentence, why Daddy, why did you hit her that night? It wasn't taken up by anybody. I dropped a few things into that book, which makes me wonder did anybody ever read it.
I noticed that, yeah.
And the other thing I dropped into the book was one day, there was a neighbour who sold the Telegraph newspaper around town, and my mammy took him under her wing. There were so many people with broken wings. And he was a great fellow to be with. He used to lift me up in his neck to go and pick blackberries with, because he was tall. But at the time I was suffering from rheumatic fever, and I had to spend 6 months of every year, starting in September, spring, and go to bed for 6 months. And this man, I used to lie there, I would be lying on the sofa, because apparently I was asthmatic. I'd come in from playing and throw myself down the sofa, breathing with difficulty. He used to put his hand up my skirt and tickle me in the vaginal area through the knickers, and I loved it. It was really pleasant. The only one who ever remarked on that was Sister Margaret McCurtain, Sister Ben.
Ben, she was the one who launched your book, didn't she?
Yeah, and Ben said to me,
Yes.
God, aren't children sexy wee devils all the same? But at least she noticed it
Of course.
and understood.
Of course.
Because I thought it was
Yes.
great insight. You can enjoy these things. I am, not defending paedophilia, but if you're young enough and they get you early enough, and all he was doing was tickling me through my knickers.
And did
And
you?
I loved it. And then one night,
Good. Yes.
as my mammy was leaving the house, about 11 o'clock, this man, John, rushed across the kitchen to put his arms around her, the way men sometimes do, and my sister Miranda squealed. And my mommy turned around and she said, "Well, what's this? Stop that." I then sang like a canary. Said, "Mammy, sometimes he puts his hand up my frock and tickles me through the knickers." And good for my mother. Such a thing to hear. I said, "I'll talk to you in a minute." And saw the man out the front door and said to me, "He'll not be back again."
Right. And was he not?
He did come back once in a while because he used to do housework for her, but he was never again left alone with us.
But you sounded, from the book and from your descriptions, I'll go back to your mother in a moment because she was a huge influence.
Yes.
But you seem to have had the time of your life roaming around the whole area on bicycles, off bicycles, up the hills.
Oh.
Sorry now, can we catch this pause just for a moment because we have a fly. Hold that question, Lelia.
It doesn't matter about the shag and fly. Don't worry about the bloody fly. It's life. Yeah.
God, you're the image of somebody I know now. Who are you?
Laura. She's Laura, darling. Who is
Who
it?
do I remind you of?
I think she's a film star.
Yes,
And
definitely. Yes,
Who
at
could
the
that
very
be?
least. Have we got rid of the fly? Are we running? Yeah, go on.
I grew up on the Bogside,
Yes.
which was a hilly area in Derry, and our street was built on a hill. And we were a matriarchal society.
You were.
There's a photograph up there in the wall of all the women in our street, said Derry women making an exhibition of themselves. Every day the woman, at about dinner time, as we called it then, lunchtime, 1 o'clock, went up the street and sat down in the street and chatted and
Yes.
talked.
Yes,
It was our
yes.
social media of the day.
Yeah.
And my mum would say, "Nell, bring me up a cigarette." Wood bound. At the
Yes.
time, I think they were 5 for a shilling in the days when people handed around cigarettes. And I could tell if the conversation was hot and heavy, the gossip was good, she would say, "Nell, go down and get me another cigarette."
So you knew by the number of cigarettes how
That-
lively.
Oh, we had a great thing called, we used to say the family rosary every
Yes.
night. And my mum would stand out in the street and shout, "Come on for say your prayers." And the rosary always ended with a prayer for the special intentions, and that was our Facebook. Special intentions.
Yes.
And they would say, "So-and-so has just got married, and Lord, keep them married," or "So-and-so's had to go to England for a job." In those days, if a marriage broke up, the man was traditionally sent to England to look for a job. That was their way of ending a marriage. And there's one woman in our street, Tess Carson. Oh, she was magnificent, glamorous woman who had sent her husband to England. He was a performer in the pantomime. That is to say, she was putting him out of her marriage and out of her home. And she used to be glamorous. She wore pencil skirts, black tights, high heels, and a beret. And the whole town admired her, including people like my mother, and it took me a while to work out. The reason they all admired her was she ended her marriage and said nothing about it and kept on gallivanting. Does that mean that she went with other men? I don't know. She was a priest's housekeeper at times too. And wouldn't have a word said against her. The woman who got away.
And was it then an unspoken kind of solidarity between the women? How strong a part did the Catholic Church play in your lives and in the lives of the families in that street and in many streets all over Ireland?
Well, we were reared as Catholics, as we all were in those days. You were baptised at birth, unless, like one of my sisters, who died within minutes of childbirth. And my mother used to give them emergency baptism.
Right.
Which meant their souls were saved and they didn't go to limbo forever. Well, you went to limbo because you had to do your penance, like doing time in jail before you're released for good.
And was the idea of penance very strong in people's minds? Did people go to confession a lot? Did you?
Yes, and I remember not going, when I stopped going to confession, I was about 14, and I had a crush on a girl at school, what we used to call in those days a pash. Passionate, and you'd give them a holy picture. It means I'm in love with you or something. And one day my mammy found my school book, my diary, I heart and stone, and my mammy was writing on me when I came in and said, "What's this?" I said, "It's me," and whatever. And she said, "Enough of that, no more of that."
Just that.
Just that, except that years later when I was writing my autobiography,
Yes.
and I used to sleep beside my mammy on the floor when she was bedridden or couldn't walk independently. I used to sleep upstairs, and then she would call me, and I'd think, okay, she'd call Nell, and I wouldn't get up. I thought she'll go to sleep again, and I would turn over and go to sleep. And then one night I woke up and she was calling me again, and I knew then the thing to do was to go downstairs and sleep beside her on the floor.
Right.
Which is where I used to sleep when I was in Greece. I always slept on the beach.
Yes.
So one night I climbed into bed with her, and for some reason I thought she was dying or breathing her last. And I put my arm around her to hold her. And she said, afterwards, she said, "Nell." I said, "What?" She said, "This bed's too narrow for the two of us. Get you back out and sleep on the floor." I get back out, and I lay on the sleeping bag on the floor on top of it, and she leaned over the bed chuckling, and she said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm down here." And she started to laugh. "Did you get out of bed?" And I said, "Yes, Mammy, you put me out." She said, "Well."
Was she was obviously a woman with a great sense of wit and humour.
She was. My mother had this thing where if something amused her, a thought occurred to her when she was out in the kitchen, the scullery washing the dishes. A thought would occur to her that amused her, and she'd go and stand in the doorway between the kitchen and the scullery, and she had a wooden spoon, and she always lifted it above her head and rested it on her shoulder, and she'd start chuckling, and you knew when she raised the spoon. You had to wait until she finished chuckling before she'd tell you what it is was amusing her. And she settled back, and you knew this is going to be good. You're going to have a good laugh or something, or be amused.
And she would tell you then, would she?
Oh, she would tell you always, and wave her wooden spoon.
She wrote you many's letter. She wrote
This
you
was
great
gold
letters.
dust. This was
Yeah.
gold dust to me, Lelia, when I was reading my
Yeah.
autobiography. And I went into the study and pulled out a desk drawer, and there were all these letters from my mammy. It was like gold dust.
Oh yeah. They're
From my
beautiful.
mother.
Yeah.
And she wrote the way she talked, real chatty and full of news, and confided things in me.
And do you think that she, as a writer, that family background, you always wanted to write, and you always did write, because you kept notes all the time.
Yes.
Either under the pillow or under the bed or wherever, having to do with whoever you were loving or
Yes.
having feelings for.
Yes.
And did you always have a sense that you would become a writer? First of all, you passed the secondary modern exam and therefore was able to go to grammar school.
Or the 11 plus and that.
Yeah.
Well, I remember at school, in primary school, with Sister Agatha. This is just before the 11 plus. She used to give me books to read. The rest were all reading books that were illustrated with comics, drawings. And I didn't like all the comics. And then one day she gave me a book called Treasure Island. Who's this wrote Treasure Island?
Robert Louis Stevenson.
The very one. And I sat there in the front row of the class and read this book to my heart's content. And she went on teaching Sister Agatha the rest of the class. And I went on reading. And I moved on from Treasure Island to what was that series of books? Robert Louis Stevenson, is it?
Could have been, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
but you became a reader.
Oh, yes.
And you used to go up to the library
Yes.
and sit in the library, and the librarian was kind.
I loved the library. It was up
Yeah.
in Brick Park, up in the top of my street, and on up near the Rosemount, in the Protestant area of Derry. Protestant in those days, Unionist. And I was enchanted when I went into the library. All those books. And I would stand there and take a book out and read it, a bit of it. And then whatever book I liked, then I would take out a whole armful of books and bring them down home. I'd have them all read in a week.
Your dad was a reader as well, wasn't he?
Yes. He used to read a newspaper called the Empire News, which had what they call saucy bits about who was breaking up with who and marriages, stuff that you didn't talk about or know about. And I used to read that the way he read that, so I had some idea of what was going on in life. But he didn't let me read it. And I noticed that he was reading the dirty bits, as we called them then. And I'd wait until he left the sitting room and then I'd go back and read the dirty bits. But my mammy also read, there was a woman's magazine come out every week called, was it called the Red Star Weekly, and it was all about romances. And the woman across the street read it and gave it to her mammy, and they swapped the woman's magazines.
Yeah,
and I grew up reading them, so I had a great time.
And you always had a lot of pals, fellas that you'd be going up on the hillsides and down.
Yes,
you became, didn't you and a fella, was it Jimmy or Joe, that you used to go and buy papers and then you would recycle the papers and sell them on. This was a very clever bit of commerce on your part.
Yeah, up to wee Johnny's.
Yes, Johnny, was that it?
He sold the comic books and you got them second hand, and I used to cycle up to him, get the comic book back down to the field, lie in the sun, read the comic book, go back up to Johnny, selling the comics for another half price, so it never cost me anything. And his comic book shop was down the laneway and up a staircase which led to what we call then the Creve, which is where you learned Irish language, and we used to go to the classes.
Your father thought it would be a good idea for you to go and learn Irish, didn't he?
Yes.
And how did that turn out?
Well, Irish was very difficult at the beginning. I found it so. Tell me tattoo, taché, and I thought, I'm going to have no chance with this. I couldn't. And then after about a month, it clicked. And I loved Irish, and I went to all my classes. And Johnny Gallagher, he taught us. First thing he did in our classes was teach us to dance waltz. What a great idea.
Brilliant, yeah.
So you'd start off the class, you'd go up the steps, go in there and waltz, speaking Os Gaeilge, and sing.
And you went on then to learn to be a French speaker. Did you do French in your initial undergraduate degree in Queen's?
Yes, I did. I did French and Irish.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to the Gaeltacht every year because I got a scholarship every year, which meant other children on the street, you didn't get away in your holidays. Nobody could afford to hire a house, but you'd go away for the day. My Uncle John was on the buses that day and we'd all scatter throughout the bus. And when the ticket inspector came on, we were told to scatter again and say, this is my mammy, this is my whatever.
But no, I was thinking about you going off for a couple of weeks on a scholarship every year over to the Gaeltacht to be with another girl and to have a friendship and a close friendship.
To have a relationship with a woman. We slept together every night. She was so much older than me. Well, that's to say, she was about 19, I was 14. And she would come over from Scotland for this, what they call the Scots fortnight. So this woman, I would go to this house and she would come on to bed beside me every night and we'd kiss passionately. Jeez, it was great.
You didn't learn French kissing until a lot later though. But leave that aside for the moment. You can tell me about that. Hold on. No, because there was a new law that enabled people to go to university for free, and because you were a bright woman,
yes,
you went to Queen's. And who was there, and what was that as an experience?
God, if I could remember their names now. Austin Curry was one of them.
He was. So was Michael Farrell.
Michael Farrell.
Yes.
All those people went on. Kevin.
Yes, the historian who became a historian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was at Queen's with all them, and it was great.
And you did French and Irish, and you failed your exams the first year because you were having too good a time, I assume. What did you learn in Queen's?
Well, you see, because of the Gaeltacht, I was fluent in Irish. But the first year I sat me oral exams at the end of the first year at university. They failed me because they said I spoke a peasant Irish.
Oh, Lord.
God, I'll never forget it. He was a German. And he discovered that Irish have been taught for thousands of years, somewhere over there in Himalaya or somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I was failed in my Irish class, but I remember going up the street and saying to my mammy, I failed my first year exams and I was crying. I said, Mammy, I failed my exams. And the woman at the doorstep, Etty Deeney, she said she'll pass them next time, and I believed her.
Exactly, quite right. Etty was quite a character on your street.
Yes.
No more than your mother.
Yeah, Etty, I used to call her Etty Deeney, and she used to do the crosswords, which not many people did. I did the crossword every Christmas, and I always won 10 shilling scholarship prize to buy books with. But Etty then discovered that Sister Agatha was doing crosswords, and they used to swap crossword puzzles and answers, and I would bring home the crossword every day.
Okay, from school.
And tell her 10 across, 5 down, and she would send me back with another answer.
Your book is in fact dedicated to 2 nuns.
Ah, yes.
They were 2 extraordinary women. Do you want to say a little bit about them?
Yeah.
Are they still alive, by the way?
No. No. But
Sister Agatha and Sister Gertrude.
Agatha, Mother Gertrude,
Yes, and Mother Gertrude.
Sister Agatha spoiled me when I was in school.
Yes.
Bad-tempered nun she was and all, except she loved me. I remember one time she asked me, we were drawing posters for Christmas, Happy Christmas, you know, you do it in block lettering and then you paint it. And I wrote Happy Christmas, and I started painting, and Sister Agatha said that Christmas is spelled with 2 S's, Christmas. I said, well, I mean, I'm just filling in the letters. She said, no, Nell, you wrote them, and she was horrified. She was genuinely upset that I could tell such a stupid lie. Oh, and I was embarrassed, and I said, yeah, you're right. I wrote out the letters. She said, Nell, don't tell stupid lies. In fact, don't tell lies at all. But if you are going to tell them, be clever about it. And I was affronted. And I swore I'd never tell a lie again with Sister Agatha. At the time, we used to get free milk from Thatcher, the milk snatcher, a bottle of 1/3 of a pint, clammy milk.
Yes.
And we drank the milk. But Sister Oliver used to make herself a cup of tea. And she always had a German bun, which was a sugar bun. And she always gave me one, called me up to the head of the class because I was a young, sickly child. I scoffed all the German buns I could.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed her. And then Sister Oliver and Sister Agatha used to come up to my mommy's house to see her. My mommy just ran an open house, people came, and I realised now, looking back, it was gold dust for them too.
Yeah.
To get out of the convent. And Sister Agatha used to come in, and she'd sit on the sofa and she'd spread her legs and plant the umbrella down between her knees, say, well, Lily, and they start talking, and Sister Oliver would ask something, and Sister Agatha would say, Oliver, will you keep quiet and I'll tell you when we get home, up to the convent.
And what about Mother Gertrude, though? She was the other woman to whom you dedicated. She was an extraordinary woman. She wrote to you.
Mother Gertrude.
Yes.
I decided at the time I was going to write my life story, autobiography, which began, I am the lonely girl in pubs, I am the girl who sits alone. I realised now what I meant by that was all the other girls went to pubs with their fellows or with other girls. I didn't have a fellow. But I went there and sat on my own. Or for some reason I decided that, and I was writing my autobiography, and I'd said to my mum, I was lying on the floor on the sleeping bag, and I said, Mummy, it's about me being lesbian. And she said to me in a warm, chatty tone, she sat up as though we were going to have an interesting conversation. She said, how do you know you are? Well, how do you tell your mother about your sex life? I changed the subject very quickly, but she was curious. I've always regretted I didn't say.
You didn't talk to her a bit more.
She told my daddy first, and my daddy said he didn't know what to do. Except he said to me, do you use a dildo? Which is a sex toy, I think, like an electric biro pencil. You put it inside yourself, and I wouldn't use it in case you get moist.
Yes.
And you'd electrocute yourself.
Yes.
No, Daddy, I don't use a dildo. Thinking, how do you know about dildos, Daddy? So my daddy said, you better go up to the convent. I don't know what to say to you. And I went up and I just spoke to Sister Agatha, who'd spoiled me at school. I don't know if I used the word lesbian then or even gay. And Sister Agatha said, I better go and get Mother Gertrude. And I thought, Jesus, that's me finished now. She's the one who decides who gets jobs in this town.
Oh, okay.
And comes Mother Gertrude, about 6 foot tall, in the old-fashioned dress, the wimple, the long frock, the big black belt with rosary beads on them. And her first words to me were, she came in, she stood in front of me, she said, Nell, you'll have to live with this. You might have to live with this for the rest of your life. And I said, but I want to be a teacher. She said, you let me worry about that. And I said, no, Mother Gertrude, the priest won't give me a job unless I go and offer. In those days, you didn't look for a job, put in your application, what are the terms and conditions. You had to offer your services to the local bishop. You had to make an appointment with him, go into his room, genuflect, kiss his ring. And I took it into my head, I'm not doing that. I don't know why. My daddy was an avid trade unionist. I'm not doing that, but still I wouldn't do it. And my mum was told by the priest, well, she'll not get a job till she kisses the ring. Then my mammy put on her hat and coat.
Yes, and she went up.
And she went up to the Protestant bishops in Derry. Well, next thing I know, a Protestant bishop arrives into the house. And I said to my mammy, there's a job going, there's a teacher in the secondary school, Protestant. No, she was a Protestant. She became pregnant unexpectedly. And the bishop said to me, there's a job going there now. My mammy said, she'll take it. The bishop said, I'm not asking you, I'm asking her.
This was after you graduated and you were going around looking for work.
Oh, yeah.
And you couldn't get work anywhere.
I couldn't get work. I wasn't given an interview with any of the bishops or any of the priests. I wouldn't go and ask for one. But the Protestant bishop said, there's a job for you. Mammy said she'll take it. And I got my job.
Yeah. Were you, you became very political later, but just this question. Michael Farrell and the others in Queen's, was that a political time or was that a time when you were having a pretty decent time dancing and drinking and having, a student life?
No, the student life was great. And 1969 was around the time of the Battle of Bogside when the whole town, all the Catholics rose up.
That's later though, that's later. No. Okay. You had been away before that. You had been... Yes. May I just bring you back for a moment? You went off after Queen's.
Yes.
And you decided to go to a kibbutz.
Kibbutz.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about the kibbutz?
Kibbutz is
why did you decide on a kibbutz? Why?
Kibbutz is a place then where they were only starting out. In Israel, 1947, they were setting up these operations. In my case, it was an orchard growing apple trees. And you volunteered for work there. And why I decided on that was I'd heard a play on the BBC radio about some man who charged the BBC with, they had banished his play. And he charged him with discrimination against him. And why? I said, I'm for the Jews. The Holocaust? Good God. And off I go to the kibbutz.
Yes.
Where word soon came back to me. The priest said I wouldn't be working in Derry again because I was now a communist.
Right.
Working for nothing. And I went to the priest and said, look, it's a Holocaust. That's why I'm working for the Jews for nothing. He would not see reason.
Was there not a sense of understanding of what had been done to the Jews at that time? This was in the 50s. This was in the early 60s.
Yeah,
this was
67, yeah.
66, 67, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, had people forgotten what had been done to the Jewish people?
In as much as they knew any history. Like if you ask people in Derry now, it's coming up the 5th of October, the anniversary of the first uprising in Derry in 1969.
68.
68, that's 52 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
What do we know about history? What did anybody know about the Holocaust in those days? I was very struck by it, just because of this play.
And did the work in the kibbutz Was it tough? I know several friends who've been in kibbutzim. Some of them had awful experiences. Some of them had pleasant experiences. What was yours like?
Oh, mine was great.
Yeah. What did you do?
You got free bed and board, and the equivalent pocket money per month, which would buy you 1 bottle of wine, and that was it.
Okay.
Boy, we were sick of apples by the time I finished in that kibbutz. Apples for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, apple squash.
Oof.
I loved it.
Good.
And I was in charge of weeding. I was a great weeder,
Really?
going around all the trees on my hands and knees.
You were very fast, I think you said.
Was, yes.
Yeah.
And not only that,
You were told to slow down, I think, because you were going too quickly.
Yes, we also had to pick cotton from the cotton. What were they? Cotton.
I don't know.
Bushes.
Trees. Yeah.
And I used to run down there was the aisle. They were planted in a straight line, and I'd run down the aisle between the cotton trees, picking the cotton as I ran, and up on the Golan Heights, half a mile away up on the hill. They used to the Golan Heights. Palestinians were they? They used to bomb us down below.
Right.
And we used to stand at the cotton trees and wave up to them and give them the fingers and laugh at them because they couldn't hit a barn door if they're standing in front of it.
Really?
Good God.
And you left there and went to Greece, did you not, for a while after that? Yes.
Yeah, I left there after the 6-day Israeli war. I went to Greece.
Was your mother worried about you in the 6 Days War because you would have been in the middle of...
Here's the contradiction, Lelia.
Yes.
My father, when I came home from dances in Derry, he'd be waiting on me. And he'd say to me, what time is it? And I said, quarter to 10. He says, no, but what time is it really? And I had to guess. I say, it's actually 11:15, Daddy, but I told you I'd be in at 10:15, so I'm half an hour late because I had to run all the way home. The buses were late leaving Borderland, and the reason I'm breathless, I was running all the way home, Daddy, to get here in time. Not because of you, but because I had to run past the back lanes. I was afraid some man would jump out and rape me, and he was still angry with me, and I didn't have the nerve to say, look, Daddy, I'm out there looking for a man to try and be normal. He was standing waiting on me dancing with my daddy. God, he was well upset about sex. He was patriarchal. And he used to threaten my sister Mirana. That was bad.
Really?
Oh God, he'd be waiting on her and he'd be jiggling up and down. And he'd get out of bed and come downstairs and stand in the kitchen and jump up and down in his pyjamas. What time is it? What time is it? And because Mirana hadn't come home, she used to stay in Buncrana overnight with her boyfriend, or in the boyfriend's mother's house. So he'd wait until he heard the door open, it would be me, and then he'd jump up and down, what time is it, what time is it? I called it getting the mental torture. My daddy did his head in, as a lot of men did in those days, about sex.
Yeah, well, they were all obsessed by it. I mean, the church was obsessed by it, so I suppose it was the thing.
Church.
What did you do with your two brothers, though, Hugh and Paddy? How did he treat them? I mean, was he giving them lectures on how to behave with women, or what?
I remember the night where we were going out, and my mammy said, now, do me and Hugh, we're going dancing. And she said, now treat every woman like the Virgin Mary. And I thought to myself, something wrong here. And the conversation deepened a bit, and Hugh said, Mammy, we all have the same feelings under our belt. And I thought, well, that's good. God, there's sex. That was all. And then it came time to say, look, I'm in love with a school girl. Did I say in love? I don't know if I used the words gay or lesbian, those.
Yes, whatever.
Days.
I think it was queer was one of the words in those days, and homosexual was one of the words.
Homosexual, I never used the word queer.
No, no. You returned from Greece, and you were looking for work, and you weren't getting any work.
No
and you
work
ran
at
into
all.
Eamon McCann coming up the street, and
was
that
coming
seems
up
to
the
me
street,
to have been the start of your active
Yeah, I'd
political
come back from London
life.
where I hadn't been able to get a job, and I presume because I was Irish. Couldn't get any interviews or anything. And the day I come back from London, I was walking down Fawn Street, down the hill, and ran into Eamon McCann. He said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going up to sign on the dole in the see if I can get a job, he said, there's an election on at the moment. Derry Labour Party, come up and help us sign the envelopes. You know, to help people qualify for voting. I said, okay, man, up I went. And into this church hall and sat down and started signing envelopes. The postal vote.
And that led on then, not the Derry Labour Party just, but the civil rights.
Yeah, no, I joined the Derry Labour Party as secretary.
Oh yeah, okay.
And that's when I first learned to impersonate voting. I used to, when I was filling in the envelopes, I had a cousin, my Aunt Nellie Crumlish, who was devoted to John Hume. She used to come and visit us every week, and then when she found John, she didn't come and see us anymore. Oh Lord. And I was out voting one day and I was going to impersonate, and there was my cousin Nellie Crumlish, and she was going to impersonate for the SDLP, and she said, hello Nell, you going to do it? And I said, yeah. Nellie, what are you doing? She said, I'm going to do it too. We both impersonated 60 times each that one day and never called each other out. I remember that so well.
That was called voting early and often.
Oh,
that's what they used to say, was it not?
And I remember Eamon, no matter how often I voted, Eamon lost the election by about 12 votes.
13 votes, I think you wrote
13.
in the book, something like that. Yes,
And,
yes, that was later. Yeah, but was that, in a sense, I mean, you've been a political animal pretty well all your life, but to be aware that you were, it seems to me it started then, at that moment. I mean, you knew about gerrymandering, you knew about the behaviour of the Catholic Church, you knew about patriarchy, you knew about the strength of women, you knew about the solidarity of women, but you actually had the first chance to put all of this knowledge really into some kind of action in the Labour Party and in the actions that followed, which was the civil rights movement, which was the marching. When did that begin?
But I was impersonating
yes.
for Eamon McCann.
And were the people in the polling booths stone blind?
You knew which bus to go to. You take your time, then you step forward. You used to nod to me to go through, going through.
Wow.
Would you get that now?
No. Well, I don't know. I don't know.
You wouldn't get that now.
There was no informality around nowadays.
No.
The informality did exist. People knew one another, I suppose. That was part.
But I remember the day Eamon lost the election, no matter how many times I voted. I went home and sat myself on the sofa and cried because he had lost the election.
Was your mother also voting?
Yes.
Was she voting for him as well? She generally did what you told her to do, and your two aunts. I remember when you became the secretary, you would decide for them what way they were to vote.
The Derry Labour Party.
Yes, the Derry Labour. Was this not? You had some success with their votes when it was necessary.
Impersonating her, I would tell my mammy who to vote for, and she knew rightly anyway.
Okay.
Vote for McCann and for another man, Stephen McGonigal, who was a trade unionist, official in Derry. And he was very popular with us too, and I was following my father's example. He was a big trade unionist.
And John Hume had started the credit union, and the civil rights movement began, and that march on the 5th of October was, the 5th of October 1968 was a crucially important march. You were on that, weren't you?
Yes, and the whole town, when I say the whole town, Catholics and nationalists, all rose up against the police who were beating their way into our houses and had beaten their way into Sam Devaney's house and beat him to death. So we rose up against the police, throwing stones at them.
And running away as fast as you could. I remember those days. Yes.
And Bernadette Devlin rose up. There was a photograph taken of her, and she'd lifted a paving stone above her head and was smashing it on the roadway to break into small stones to throw at the people.
Yes.
And she was also wearing a pair of brand new denim jeans, which I happen to know now. She was called the cowgirl or something. She was dressed just like a cowhand with something on her blue jeans and a beret. She'd arrived in Derry that morning in a suit with a skirt to give an interview. The riots had started, and she went up to our house, my mummy's house, and took our Carmel's new jeans and put them on. Now, new jeans in those days were a lot. Yes. Carmel was earning 7 and 6pence a week.
Your younger sister, Carmel, she took her jeans well done.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realise that that's what she was wearing.
Oh, yes.
Suited her nicely.
They did,
Yes.
yeah, and she never replaced them.
What were your... I can imagine that the solidarity and the sense of comradeship among people was very strong in those days, and that the sense of making change, was that part of what you felt? What were your feelings like in those days?
Lelia, one night I came home early.
Yeah.
It was about 11:15. The riots were dying down, and my father was in bed and he knocked on the wall. Used to know he was awake because he was in the choir and he used to sing Jerusalem. And he stopped singing and called me and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "The riots are over." He said, "Are they over?" I said, "No, they're ending," but I was tired and I thought I'd come home. He said, "Go you back out until the riots are over." And I said, "My father sent me out." "Excuse me, Daddy, what about sex?" But out I went and took part in the riot again. And then a few months later, no, a short while after that, and there's another riot, and we were running, you couldn't get a bed in the town, or people were sleeping over in people's beds. And I went home one night and I couldn't get into my mother's bed. She was in bed with two fully dressed men. One was a priest and one was a professor. Mm-hmm. I said, "Hello," I knew them. Mammy giggled, said, "I'm sleeping with two men." And I went downstairs and I said to my daddy, next morning, I said, "Daddy, my mammy slept with a priest and a professor last night." And he smiled and said she never lost it. Excuse me, Daddy.
Well, you took after her in a lot of ways. That is absolutely the truth. Because that sense of impishness and fun was always there. And then after the beginning of the civil rights and Bernadette was involved in the Battle of the Box, she was then, of course, elected, whether or not through impersonation or not.
No,
we think not. She was elected
the first
properly.
time.
Yeah, properly the first time. And then she went to Westminster. And then the Battle of the Bogside began. She came back to that, and then she was bundled off to America.
She was arrested and charged with riotous behaviour, and she was thousands of us out on the streets those days.
I remember.
All of us photographed, all of us televised. Bernadette was the only one that they arrested and charged and sent off to prison.
They needed an example, and she was obviously even.
What did we do? This is Bernadette Devlin.
Yes.
My mammy went up to, she heard that we were meeting Bernadette. She was travelling down from Belfast, and that she met halfway there was Michael Farrell and them. And my mum went up to Belfast and met Bernadette and Michael Farrell and that, and took them into their custody and brought them back to the Bogside where they were arrested and taken away. And my mum was smashing stones on the street, and I said, "Mammy, SSR, you see." I said, "Our grandfather, Sergeant John Patrick Duffy, used to run the Lecky Road police barracks. We come from a long line of police officers, four or five generations back." And my mammy said, "Your granddad was a good policeman." And she threw another stone. I laughed at that. Jesus, mammy.
Well, listen, this is then the introduction to a whole life of politics.
Yes.
In which protest, in which beginning to understand the differences that one could make by action.
And gerrymandering,
And well, you knew about gerrymandering, all of those things you knew about. But now there was an opportunity to reverse those, to look for the 5 demands, to ask for a house for everybody, a job for everybody, equal pay for people, all of those things. Was there a huge amount, and you were also engaged, of course, in being the secretary to different organisations all the way along.
Mainly the Derry Labour Party, I was secretary, and my sister Nell was also secretary after me.
Yes, but in the civil rights, before the British Army arrived, you were also involved there.
Very
and then,
much so.
Well, after the Battle of the Bogside and all of those, hectic times, did people get sleep at all? What happened in houses? I know that your house was the great visiting house. Everybody who was around in any sense active. Your house was the place to which they came.
That's right, down there. It used to be like clockwork. About 1 o'clock in the morning, the front door bell would ring, and I'd open it. There was John Hume. He always come and said, and I let him in, brought him in, sat him down, gave him his cup of tea, and he asked me what happened. Particularly the night Seamus Cusack was shot dead. He running across an alley, an entrance to a lane to pick up a helmet. dropped by a British soldier, and as he bent down to pick it up, Seamus Cusack, the soldiers shot him.
Yeah. Well.
And dead.
Yes.
And we decided, because it was Seamus Cusack, we couldn't bring him to the hospital, across the river, over the waterside. We drive him in a car to Letterkenny Hospital, across the border.
The other way, yes.
And on the way there, he died, Seamus Cusack, and the bell rang at 1 in the morning. It was John Hume, and he said that his party was going to pull out of Stormont. What happened? And I told him what happened. Seamus Cusack was shot dead as he ran across the road to pick up a fallen helmet. John Hume said to me, well, if you say that's the way it was, Nell, that's the way it was. God, was I complimented and flattered. And he went, he left then and pulled his party out of Stormont. So he used to always come up to my mummy's house.
That's right. She was. It was. Well, you've always had that in you as well, of a welcoming place.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
You know, for people who needed a bed or needed a bit of advice or needed a cup of tea. I mean, your mother was the absolute epitome of that welcoming, wasn't she? Always. Mary Holland, Bernadette, all of those were people who were constantly there. Now, when there was a story though of a bit of a treachery that you talk about in the friendship that you had with Mary Holland and Eamon McCann, and this was when you got a job in the Irish Times, and you were sent up by the Irish Times, Donal Foley being your boss, a great character, lovely man, to cover Bernadette getting out of jail.
Yes.
And that wasn't the way it should have been.
No, when I arrived there, when I was known as a friend of Bernadette's, she used to stay in my house, my mother's house.
Yes.
And a lot of media were there, and they gathered around me because they knew I was a friend of Bernadette's, etc.
This was outside the jail?
No, this was inside the courthouse.
Oh, that was that? No, she was being let out when she was coming out of jail.
She was, yes.
Yes, no, when you were sent up by the Irish Times,
yeah. And the objective was, of course, to get since I knew Bernadette, to get a photograph of Bernadette coming out of jail, a bit like Constance Markovitz or Maura Comerford.
Yes.
This would be an historic photograph.
Yes, exactly.
And then Eamon McCann sell the rights to her photograph to the Daily Mirror tabloid, I think, and took the money to pay off his election expenses. He just lost the election, and the guy who's running the election for him, his election agent, had run away with the money and stolen it. And Eamon sold Bernadette's photograph. And then she foolishly posed in a children's playground, sitting in a children's swing, with her legs up in the air. And I was raging with Eamon. I mean, where's the Constance Markovitz? Where's the woman stepping out of jail? Where's the history in this photograph?
Did you have a falling out over that?
Oh, we did. We did, yeah. Well, we did, but in fact, as with all things, you sorted out eventually. But
and with Mary Holland, you say you did reconcile before she died?
We did, yeah. But Eamon wrote a book called War in an Irish Town about our war. And then he republished it, reissued it. And he managed in that book never to mention my name once, though he was in my house every day, my mother's house every day, come over every day to dictate a statement for the Derry Labour Party and this and that. This
is amazing. The Derry Labour Party, there's a tradition of doing that, you know, you're in good company. Cathal O'Shannon, who was the father of young Cathal O'Shannon, his father was a tiny northern Labour man, and he was absolutely central to a lot of the Labour Party's works during the Rising. He was totally written out of the history of the Labour Party in one of the early books. So you're in good company, darling.
Yes.
Don't be too worried.
I remember crying when I went home one time. Sat down with Mummy and said, been written out of history, and we didn't win, we lost the seat. I took it seriously enough that I cried at the thought of us not getting a seat, and I imagine people in Derry not voting for Eamon McCann. Equally, I remember the day Eamon McCann putting into the Derry Labour Party again, or People Before Profit, running yet again for election after about 60 times or something. Finally. Yet again, he was always defeated. And this one day, Eamon McCann was elected. And he stood there. He went up to the microphone, you know, you're elected. And he said, I feel a song coming on. Amen. And he opened his mouth and started singing, "Arise, ye starvelings, from your slumber, revolt, ye prisoners of one." And he sang it.
Go on, sing up, you.
Well, when do you ever see him in the can? It was such an honest thing to do. And,
Yes.
and to say, I'm delighted I finally got elected. And so is everybody. Amen, you finally got in because you didn't give up. You know, look, it took us this long to elect you.
Yeah.
Revolt, ye prisoners of want, for reason and revolt now slumbers, and at last ends the age of cant. Away with all your superstitions, servile masses, arise, arise. This was even singing.
Great woman, that's great. Good.
He and I were
Good
the only
on
two
you.
in the whole hall who knew that song.
Ah, yeah. Well, that's it. You would have known it, of course.
Oh, I did.
But listen, through the beginning of your writing life, really, in public,
Yes.
was when Donald Foley asked you to come and be a member of the staff of the Irish Times. And
Yes.
you went and discovered that you had to be a member of the NUJ, and you thought, oh, well, that's the end of that now, because I'm
Yes.
not a member. And Donald said, don't worry, this is not a matter that you should be bothered about at all. That'll be
Yes.
all. And it was. The Irish Times was a home to you
It was never
From
that, but the first day
69 onwards.
I got the job in the Irish Times.
Yeah.
Sensational. But I couldn't go the first day in the job because I was due to take part in a protest to occupy Omagh County Council House, protest against discrimination in awarding housing
Yes.
to Protestants. And indeed, one of the first things they did was present a house. There's hundreds, thousands on the waiting list for years. They presented a house as a wedding present to the woman who'd just been elected Secretary of the Unionist Party. Oh, Lelia, I've asked about her so often. This is where my
Really?
memory, and I can't see to read or get people to check out. Whatever happened to that woman? She was given up, as a result of her being given that house. The whole
Austin
civil
Curry
rights
and the whole civil rights business
rose up.
Rose up, yes, that is true. What was her name? Jeepers. I will find it out.
I wish you would, yeah. And
will.
how is she doing since?
Exactly. I hope she's alive and well. Now listen, here's the thing though. You began to write. You were sent out on stories. How did it work? What was it like, the life of a journalist with the Irish Times?
Well, the first day when I didn't turn up for work because I was due to occupying Omagh County Council courthouse. And I went into the Irish Times my first morning there. I wasn't there. I went on a day late. And Donald Foley was there, and I said, Donald, my granny died yesterday. I couldn't come to the office. And Donald said, look, Nell. And he took out a copy. There's a newspaper in front from the Irish News. And I was on the front page, leaving Omagh County Council with, I think, Bernadette and Nell McCafferty. And Donald said, Nell, you're a journalist now. You're all over the front page. And I thought, and Sister Agatha, if you're going to lie, do the right lie. And I thought, and he let me go. And I thought, that's it. That's the end of my job.
He loved women who had opinions and courage. Courage. He was a great man.
Donald Foley. He enjoyed women's company.
He did.
And he enjoyed his own writing.
Yeah.
There's some woman now working in the Irish Times called Foley. Is she anything to Donald?
She's his daughter.
Is that Donald's daughter?
I think it is. I believe so, yeah.
That's I must go and look her up.
Yeah, no, do. But here's the thing, and what I want to know is, how did it feel? You, first of all, I met you with Jack Dowling the day you came to Dublin. And you actually wrote for us, because we were doing Dublin Opinion at the time,
That's
which
right.
was short-lived. And you wrote every issue, I think it was every fortnight or something, you wrote a letter from Mrs. Paisley to Mrs. Khrushchev. Do you remember that? And you used to write a letter back from Mrs. Khrushchev to Mrs. Paisley. Yes, you did. They're in Dublin Opinion.
Was I pretending they were real?
Of course. Of
And
course.
people, oh.
You were writing and saying, oh, the situation here now is very difficult and all that. I was looking for the copies the other night. I couldn't find them, but I will. I will. John Dowling found them for me some time ago and gave them to me.
Oh, that
and
would be
they're
great.
somewhere. I will find them. Yeah, so that was
I liked her, Rhonda Paisley.
Yes, exactly. So,
And I like Mrs. Paisley, Lady Eileen Paisley.
there you are. Well, Eileen Paisley was the one who was writing to Mrs. Khrushchev. Did you know Mrs. Khrushchev? Obviously, you must have had some feeling for her.
I met her once. We were at I was with Des O'Malley,
Yeah.
and Khrushchev had come and was about to get on the plane, and the plane was delayed. Boris Yeltsin
That was
drunk
Yeltsin.
again.
Yeltsin. That was afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
afterwards. And
Oh yeah.
so I was standing outside the plane waiting for her to take off, and I was smoking, and Des O'Malley was smoking, and then I said, Jesus, Des, we're standing beside an aeroplane smoking. It's not allowed. We could blow ourselves up. And Des went white, I went white, and we put out the cigarettes on the ground. I thought, if anybody saw us now, we should not have been allowed to smoke.
No.
Where was the special branch at the time? We could have
Where
blown everybody
indeed.
up.
Where indeed. Come back though. I want to know what it felt like to be a young woman with a job in Dublin and plenty of things needing to be done on behalf of women. What were your feelings?
I loved writing Lelia.
Yes, good. Tell me.
And I you see, I knew enough from having consorted with other journalists. And I think I said to you, I realised later the number of journalists get into my mother's house, get on off the street, sit down, meet all the neighbours, IRA, former IRA, people like that. Wasn't it great for them? They got off the streets and into a Bogside house and see what was going on and hear what was going on. There's no holds barred. So that was great.
When you yourself then became a writer.
I became a writer, and Donald Foley said, Nell, you're a journalist now. You can't do that anymore. But I've been thinking about that, Lelia. At the time, the women's movement had just been launched, Irish Women's Liberation Movement.
Yes.
And because I had more or less made my own hours in the Irish Times, I would get back home, back to the office early, write me Eyes of the Law column. I was doing a lot of what I call social work then.
Could you go back for a moment to the Eyes of the Law column, because that was a very, I mean, you may not wish to remember it now, because I think at one stage you say, did it ever change anything? Of course it did. It made huge change in the sense that people had of the justice being meted out to small children and being given sentences for doing nothing for, you know.
Terrible, yeah.
It was shocking. And it was, I suppose, you were pretty harsh on the judge, and I think everybody felt that you were right to be. Have you a remembrance of her? Do you remember her?
There's one judge in particular called Robert O'Huey, Judge O'Huey. Every time he opened his mouth, he put his foot in it, because nobody ever covered the district courts where it was automatic jail sentences for many people, and the judges were bigoted. I knew that. The judge would say, coming up to Christmas, well, depending on the time of year, coming up to Christmas, he would warn, I'm going to put people in jail for shoplifting. So it was a seasonal thing.
But that was people, this was the children's court. You were really...
Children's court.
You were giving the children's court a real exposure for the first time.
I did.
People didn't realise what was happening.
No.
Until you wrote about it.
I didn't, and I sat there recording everything that was said, which had never been done before. The case might only last a couple of minutes, only be a few sentences, and I wrote everything down, described the defendants and the judges, and how every time they opened their mouth, they put their foot in it. They were saying things that were illegal. For example, one judge, I'm going to say Kama Sutra, no, that's a sex act.
No. There was a judge called Eileen, what was her name? She was the woman you were generally always in the court with. And she was also trying to reform the court, as I recall. Do you remember her?
I do, but only vaguely.
Yes, that's all right.
Remember
Anyway,
names.
but go ahead. That series was a revelation, and it became an award-winning series. And it gave you the prominence and the, one aspect of your life. But you were obviously doing a million other things as well. Being women's liberation movement.
Besides doing the Eyes of the Law and being a social worker, I used to go out to I was part of a job as a feminist too.
Yes.
Was to go out to Ballymun, to the Kathleen Maher, founder members of the women's movement out in Ballymun. And I would go out there. God, I had to go out by car. It took me forever. or by bus. And they would tell what they all wanted was money to pay their electricity bills or their gas bills. And I remember one time going past a bunch of corporation workers, and they were sitting around the fire reading my column. And I stopped and I said, "Hey fellas, that's my column." They said, "I will know."
Did they?
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
That must have given you a sense of, you know, I'm doing something here.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And in terms then of, you know, justice and fair play to people, were you engaged then in one-to-one, or were you engaged in, of course you were engaged in campaigns, I know, but was it a non-stop attempt to change the world? Was that what you were engaged in?
Well, I knew it was attracting good attention, or what that black civil rights man say, it was, I was breaking a good law, a good lawbreaker. I knew what I was doing was helping people, especially when you find the corporation workers sitting around a fire reading your piece. And I remember once some man went frantic when I was in the courthouse up there. The press had a special box for themselves, and I was sitting there, and this poor man came up and he said, he was nearly in tears, he said, "Look, my name has just come up, I've been sentenced for something. Please don't put my name in the court." And I said, "Mister, I never put names in," which I didn't. I knew from my own experience, you know, if your name is in a paper, it could blacken your name.
Yes.
I said I never used names, but I always named the judges.
Yes, absolutely. I remember that too.
And then one time, Terence Severe White, who was a sort of legal advisor at the Irish Times. Terence Severe, was he a poet as well?
He was also a writer. He was,
writer.
yes. And he was a literary critic, I think, in the Irish Times. He was the literary editor, yes.
And he took me out, called the Irish Times for one day to take me out a walk. And we walked over to Bealtaine, where I used to go with you and
Others. Yes.
And Terence Severe White said to me, "Justice O'Huey is going to retire. It'd be nice if you wrote one column praising him." I said, "If there was such a column, if everybody says the right thing, I record everything." He said, "All the same, he's not a bad man if you knew him." And I said, "I know his law, I know what he does." Terence said, "All the same." And I went on the Irish Times and I resigned. Oh, in a huff I went. And I left.
Is that what caused you to leave?
Well, yes, but half an hour after I resigned, I thought, holy God, where do I get a job now? What am I going to do for money? Holy God. I went back into the Irish Times and said, "I'd like to withdraw my resignation." And they said, "Yeah, quite right. We never submitted it anyway."
Good.
So I kept the job, and O'Huey then left the court and became a barrister. But I never covered him at that, because I was only interested in short cases, which the district court short case are 2 or 3 sentences, 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes.
But I remember that Terence Severe White made it his business to ask me to go up, ease up on Justice O'Huey. And I explained to him until I said, "Look."
You see, you'd be regarded as a tough old critic, and you'd be a tough old critic of the hierarchy of both sides, of any side. Was that bred in you because of your experience? Was this just innately you, that you would always ask the question that was a tough question of the higher ups?
I didn't get a chance to answer questions, because if you wanted a job in the Irish Times, you had to apply to for an appointment with the priest, kneel down and kiss his ring, and I would not do that.
I know, yes.
So I never got asking. But I always explain to people, if they say the right thing in court, I'll be happy to publicise it. And by the right thing, I just meant, you know, don't make it seasonal justice. It's coming up to Christmas and I'm warning you, I'm going to be handing out jail sentences if you're caught shoplifting. And it never happened. Then I did.
Just in terms, though, of the women's movement afterwards, I mean, we are all very well known for the split, the Irish split. You talk about being in Copenhagen with... at a women's conference, an international women's conference, and you wished to draw attention properly to the state of the Armagh women in jail. Right. And I think you didn't find that you were supported really by the women's movement.
I was not.
No. Talk a little about that. We'll have another drop of water there, I think. Would that be nice?
I had gone over there. I'd heard that some women were going over from Armagh Court to take a stand for the dirt, what they call the dirt strikers, the women who were not using toilets in jail. They peed on the floor and shit on the floor and took the excrement up in their hands and
put it
wiped
on the wall.
on the wall.
Yes.
And I was writing about that, and no, when I arrived, next thing I know, Mary Maher arrives beside me. Mary Maher, also in the Irish Times.
Yes.
She'd heard I was there, and she got the Irish Times to send her over to write her version of the Armagh woman's thing. But I had already made friends with
3 or 4 international women, Americans.
Bella Abzug.
Bella Abzug, yes. Yes.
She was a big deal.
Yeah.
And 2 other women. And I'd made friends with them, and Sylvia Meehan.
Yes, another great woman. Yeah, she was.
And so I took my stand for the Armagh woman, and
I think you decided to have a protest when the minister who was going to make a speech there came along. That was a minister for County Clare, Brendan.
that's right. And he...
and you said to them, don't come. You come in at 10 o'clock because I am going to be there at 20 past 10 because he's arriving at 10:30.
Yes.
So did you mount an individual protest then, calling attention to
I did, because I mean, they'd come all the way over, Mary Maher and them would come all the way over, and only because I was there, and it wasn't that they ever had been involved with the Armagh woman or anything, but I didn't want Mary Maher to go into trouble. The Irish Times had sent her over, and now there was I. So I said to the woman I called, I said, look, I'll be putting a picket on that when the judge is appearing in public, or Bella Abzug and them. I'll appear in the picket line at 10:30. Get you in there before I put on the picket. And they agreed, and it was great. So they came, protested early, and I left. And then I went and took up the picket myself.
Yes.
So I was playing both sides against the middle, because...
Was that before you wrote the book? Before you put together the Armagh Women
Yes.
in Armagh?
Yeah.
And which is an amazing revelatory piece. And you write that you, at the launch, you and the publisher were the only people at the launch.
That's right.
How did this happen, and what happened later? Because it must have caused a stir. It must have been... It's a very important piece of work.
I remember June Levine.
Yes, June Levine, yes.
June decided to accompany me to the book launch.
Yes.
Okay, June, thank you, which was daring enough of her and her marriage to Ivor Brown, because it was not acceptable to be supporting the Armagh woman. But June came with me to the book launch, and there was nobody at it.
Was that because people regarded the book and you, as IRA supporters?
Oh yes, IRA fellow travellers.
I see.
Now part of that would have been because I'm from Derry with my accent.
Yes.
I didn't at that time speak against the IRA. It took me a couple of years to say I've been thinking about this, and I think the IRA campaign is legitimate. And that was me finished again. Except people got over it, because at least I told the truth. I didn't join the IRA, and I admitted quite candidly I wouldn't join the IRA because I'd just been speaking to a sniper.
A sniper meaning a sniper with bullets, or a sniper
bullets and a
from
gun.
the edge? I see, yeah.
A sniper, just, you know, you'd lie and wait for a bit of a soldier to appear and you'd shoot them. They said to me that the awful thing about being a sniper was if you hit someone, you woke up the following morning and you saw the name, address and photograph and personal details of the person you'd killed. She said it was awful. They might be a parent, a spouse, a young person, and that influenced me a great deal.
To do what? To feel what?
To feel that the IRA had feelings too. the snipers, that they didn't... At the time there was a book published called Last Night Another Soldier, and it was a send-up of... And the front page of the newspaper would be, Nell McCafferty, IRA sniper, was killed this morning. She had 3 children. On about the 3rd week would be, last night a woman was killed. Last night another soldier was killed, and they dropped all the details.
Oh, why was that?
There's too many of them.
Yes.
And it was a waste of space to name them and their spouses, and you had to go and get the details right.
Bernadette said to me once, I am not a militarist. I don't believe that power comes from the barrel of a gun. But if somebody was to form an army and I felt it was necessary and nobody else was going to do it, I might myself do it. The sense of where you come from and the attitudes that creates within you, either as a woman or as a nationalist, did that affect you in your not denouncing the IRA and becoming, in the eyes of people who were looking on, an IRA sympathiser?
No. Well, no, I'm merely confirming what a lot of people suspected anyway, except nobody knew that I thought the IRA campaign had a certain legitimacy, armed struggle. Mm-hmm. The same as the stance I took when I said abortion could be considered the killing of a potential human being. I just told the truth as I saw it, and it changed people's minds. But basically, as I explained to people, I'd be afraid to be in the IRA because if I was caught, I'd sing like a canary. I'd tell them everything. Even though when you tell them everything and I knew what they were doing, they'd pull your teeth out, they wouldn't believe you.
Yes.
In fact,
I see.
One of my cousins, a cousin, I keep meaning to look him up, he saw the Shankill butchers. He was captured by the Shankill butchers and for some reason unusually escaped. And the cops, PSNI, caught him, put him into the back of their unmarked police car and drove him down the Shankill. Said, pick out people here in the Shankill butchers. You were working with them all night. And he would finger people.
Gosh.
Oh God.
But that's part of armed struggle, isn't it, really? I mean, isn't it? The whole world of
but I never looked him up again. How did he do that, cousin of mine?
No.
Did he leave Northern Ireland? Did he go away? What kind of a life was he going to have? I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know, Lelia. I used to walk past Shankill Road Women's Centre up there near Donegal Street.
Yes.
And in the Shankill Road Women's Centre, a 2-storey building, on the 2nd storey they had romper roomed a woman, that is to say, who had been having an affair with a loyalist, or she had an affair with a British soldier, having an affair with a loyalist, and therefore was selling out to the enemy. And by rompering her, they flung a rope over a beam up in the ceiling, tied it around their feet, and pulled them upside down, pulled them up to the roof, and then let go of the rope, and they would go down, bounce off the ground and squeal, and then they lift them up again, and they were bleeding. And those women in the Shankill Road actually took a cigarette break while this woman lay bleeding on the floor and her son was nearby squealing away. These are all on my list. I'd love someone to go and interview those Shankill Road women who rompered.
Yes. Well, I think both sides had ways of... I mean, romper rooms were well known on the loyalist side of the world as awful places for people to be tormented and tortured. But, the RA had their own ways of dealing with people. I mean, there isn't a way in which war isn't going to create appalling injustices and deaths.
There's a way of saying, look, there's a difference between getting an IRA person to execute them and shooting them in the back of the head, or shooting them in the front of the face, or shooting one bullet to kill them, and rompering them,
yes.
bouncing them up and down off the floor.
Well, come on, there's the terror of youngsters having their knees done, having their legs taken, having all kinds of, injuries.
Lelia, there have been so many kneecappings in Northern Ireland. Do you ever see anybody limping?
Plenty.
I've never seen it.
Up in Ballymurphy, I have seen.
Ah.
Yes, I have. Listen, Nell, come on. We must get on to a couple of the questions that you want asked. Have you say at one point, I think, it's very interesting, that feminism sometimes regards itself to be about sex and not about love. You've had a life which has been, to say the least, active, checkered. You've loved women. You've had great affection for men. You are dearly loved by many. And you have loved many. And you write very wisely about it. And I think what you've written is a great help. I hope it would be a great help to young people who have, like you, a question about their sexuality or their gender or whatever. Given your life now, what wisdoms have you? I mean, you've been working on behalf of women. You've been taking part in things which have achieved contraception, divorce, equality, abortion. All of these, would be regarded as civil rights that women are entitled to.
Yes, now.
Are you content with that?
Well, I'm not content with myself, Lelia, in that I'm at an age now, 76, where I cannot have two consecutive clear thoughts. My mind is, as they say in South Wexford, a marley, mixed and non-productive soil. I don't really know what's going on in the women's movement anymore. They had an annual general meeting 3 weeks ago, and it was zoomed, or was that the word for it? Televised internally.
Yes.
Wasn't advertised.
Oh, okay.
I should have made a point of going to it. Even when I heard it, I could have got in. And I didn't, and I thought, is that because I cannot think clearly, or because I'm getting tired and fed up being a social worker, or what? And do all things come to a natural end? And people say, about people like me nowadays, I read that I'm vulnerable age, 75, and vulnerable and 75. And I went on radio one time and said, look here, I may be 75, but stop calling me vulnerable. I'm old enough to have had my mortgage paid off. I'm free as a bird and have a great pension, old age pension. So it's great.
Yes.
People said I was being smug, and I said, oh, wasn't it just reminding us all that there comes an end to some things? And it was great for a certain cohort in this country who were getting to a certain age, because when I was growing up, I was of the age, I was born in 1944, 69, we all started rising up in revolt, and people were getting to buy houses, and those of us who did that are now, mortgage free. It's great.
Yes. What's left to be done? If you were now starting out again,
I spend too much time having what I call maggots in my head. For example, there was announced on the radio a few weeks ago that someone, a domestically abused woman, had her arm broken in 3 places. And I thought, she must have been squealing. How do you break an arm in 3 places? Did someone tie her down? And I go through that in my head. Do you break it at the wrist and you're squealing? They tie your hand to the table and then break it again, the forearm, and you're still squealing, and then they break it again the 3rd time. Somebody's squealing while that is happening. What about the person who's doing it? What do they think? I think about it far too much. Domestic violence.
it's heavy. It's a
Heavy.
heavy.
Well, I do know that some women who work in women's aid have had to give up talking. They had to get training, talking to women who were domestically abused. They had to stop it after a few months because it was upsetting them.
Really?
And upsetting their minds and putting violence into their thoughts. And I sometimes, I still do, have violent thoughts in my head. I go through it in my head, what would I do? And I think, well, supposing you were domestically No, I'll just say a man. Domestically abusing a woman. For example, that man who broke the woman's arm 3 times. I think to myself, what I'll do with you is I'll carry a leather apron and I'll have a little hand revolver inside it and I'll take it out, and when I see you or hear of you're abusing a woman, I will shoot you in the left elbow and the right knee. So if you're shot in the right knee now, you need a crutch. But you can't use your left arm.
It's very specific. It
It
is all
is.
right.
I think about that a lot and think, oh God, I wish, domestic violence against domestic abuse is the big bugbear in my life at the moment.
Oh, yes.
And
It's true.
when I go up and down my street, you know, the ones that I know,
Mm.
I'm not aware that there's domestic abuse in some houses, but it's going on somewhere. But I don't hear people squealing or shouting, and I think, is that because I'm not paying enough attention? It had been my intention to apply to Women's Aid and ask if I could go and attend some of their classes where they talk to women who've been abused.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't face it, Lelia.
Yeah.
I just...
Yeah. You don't have to.
Well, somebody has to.
Well, there are people who do. And thank
Well, there aren't
goodness.
enough. There aren't enough.
Well, no, but I suppose it doesn't start in Women's Aid. It starts long before it with the education system that we have at the moment, which educates fellas in a certain way and girls in a certain way. And I suppose there'll always be an opportunity.
There's that small breakthrough that if you're training with Women's Aid now, women's refuges, you have to go along and attend some of the interviews where women who are abused tell you about what it was like. I could not face it, Lelia. I don't want to. I just couldn't bear
There
the
are
pain.
people. Well, all we can say is thank God for the people who do. It at least is something. Tell me though, over your long life, what have you to say about love? You've been in love with all kinds of good and medium and decent and perhaps not too decent people. What's your feeling about love? What impels you?
You mention love, I think of sex.
Okay.
I think of sex, I think of my hips,
Yes.
and it's too sore, and I put it out of my mind. I'm just not going there again. It is, Lelia, it's 10 years since I've been kissed, or kissed anyone, or desired anyone, or been desired by anybody.
Wow.
10 years, haven't been kissed.
We have some questions here that the people who produce this, Emma, want to ask. And one of them is this. I'm going to wait for you. Oh yes. What does the phrase difficult woman mean to you?
A difficult woman?
Your book was called A Disorderly Woman.
Yes.
You described it. You said Nell is the name of the book, A Disorderly Woman. This great autobiography of yours. What
Okay.
does that mean to you?
I think, the Catholic Church in the Catechism and the Catholic state in their constitution, the laws, say that I was born innately disordered. Me.
Yes.
In what way am I innately disordered? What they mean by that is that I had my sexuality was lesbian. But if I'm innately disordered, what do you make of priests who are consecrated? And you have the cheek to tell me, I had this discussion with a really nice priest, he was a wee missionary. His job in China was he works in Chinese villages, where in China, people do not look after the elderly. That's because you're in village A, village B, village C, and you've been sent off to Beijing, leaving your mother behind, paralysed, your father down the road, blind. You don't get to look after them. And this priest did this terrible job. He was going to try and persuade people in Chinese villages to start looking after the elderly in their community. But I talked to him. That isn't important. I'll tell you what's important.
Did you ask him what he meant by innately disordered?
No.
Do you think he would have known?
Well, I would have said to him, you're innately disordered. You refuse to recognise your sexual urges.
Well, or yes. Now
Up
that
till
is a
today.
big, long conversation, Nell. Perhaps.
Yes, but it does nevertheless.
Yes.
He is refusing. And do you remember the time, Lelia, when they would not allow women to use tampons when they were first introduced? Tampons.
Yes.
This is, say, it was like a cardboard tube inside which was cotton. To wear that during your period, you had to insert it into your vagina and push until it reached your cervix, which is the muscle at the top of the vagina.
Thank you for this knowledge.
And the Catholic Church protested against that, said these women are giving themselves sexual pleasure. They
Imagine.
must stop using tampons. And I then asked the question, well, if they're doing that, how come about all these holy men, priests, consecrated? They only got consecrated because they have a penis. Otherwise they wouldn't have qualified. And they're touching their penis every day, they're holding it, fondling it, they look at it, because that's what you do in France. You know, you have little B-days. It's quite normal to look at your feces, to see what colour is it, what length is the stool, what quantity is it, or is it hard or soft. People examine their own stool. I presume when men are going to the toilet all the time, they do look at their penises.
I assume
Well,
so.
excuse me. Is that disorderly? Innately? They're touching themselves all the time.
Indeed. Stop a minute now. There's another thing here. What is the one thing you would like to see change? Well, I think we've covered that, because really domestic violence and, you know, being able to find a way to put a stop to that kind of, you know, disorderly behaviour. Now, here's the last question. Nell, my
Disorderly,
darling,
British.
is this it? Have you any questions yourself? What brings you joy? What brings you joy, Nell?
I'll tell you what doesn't, because I had a stroke, which has left me with impaired eyesight. I cannot now read a book. I cannot read small print.
So
I cannot read newspapers. I lead a life of loneliness and solitude. At times where I think, am I heading for a nervous breakdown? Am I in the middle of it? I can tell you what brings me unhappiness. What brings me joy now? I'm so prone to this now, Lelia, these what I call, whatever I call them, the maggoty thoughts, maggots. One day I was walking down Ranelagh, a sunny day, the sun was on my back. I was heading for the Lewis. And I was happy. I felt the sun on my back and I felt a small smile on my face, and I came to a shuddering halt. I thought, who's sitting with my mammy now? She at the time was of an age in her 90s and couldn't move independently, was practically bedridden. Who is sitting with my mammy now? And I started adopting older women around the street. I would call over to see them, take them to Sandymount in my car in the days when I had a car and could drive, take them out a walk, because I never again wanted to think
of your mother.
Of my mother, visitors not coming to see her. Who was visiting my mother in Derry. I've never forgotten that. And the worst thing, the worst thought that comes into my head, Lelia, all the time, I call them maggoty thoughts, is the day my mammy turned around. She was in hospital for a while, being looked after, and it was time for her then to change. Where is she going to go? And my mammy swung her head around to me like a blind polar bear and said, Nell, what'll I do? Jesus, Lelia. I was like, being executed, what'll I do, Nell? I keep going over that thought.
Well, she had a very happy life, your mother.
Lelia, I know she did. She also had a hard time.
Yeah, but so did you. I mean, when you talk now, here you are, and what makes you, what gives you joy, and you say, no, what doesn't give you joy is the fact that you've had a stroke. You've come through marvellous events. I remember visiting you just after you had your heart surgery, and you were alive and raving at the time. You're not raving at all now. And I sort of feel you've got to get back to reading, so you better have that cataract operation now.
And they're going to stick stuff in my eye and pull it
No,
out.
they're not. No, they're not.
They have
They're
to,
going
Lelia, they have to remove it physically.
Are you looking at me?
Well, am I looking at you?
I've got two eyes with lenses that never were there when I was born. So,
I mean, they put lenses,
Yeah.
new lenses into your eyes.
yeah, same as they're going to do with you.
And
Get
the
it?
new lenses they put on gave you sight again.
Absolutely.
Are you telling me I can get new lenses put into my eyes?
Yes.
Which will enable me to see again?
Yes.
Now, Lelia, are you sure?
Are you asking me? I am
I'm
not a
asking
medical
you.
genius. I'm just telling you, that's my experience. So now,
New lenses put onto your eyes?
exactly.
Were you frightened, Lelia?
No.
Did you know what it involved?
Well, I had vague notion.
What did it involve?
They put me to sleep, fixed it,
And did what?
then told me,
And they put something under your eye and removed the cataract?
that's it. That's it. Another lens, just a new lens. That's
And you I didn't know they could do that. You mean I could...
That's
I
what
could,
they're doing, darling. That's
Like,
what the cataract
really,
operation is.
be-
Excuse me, you don't have to go
no.
on with this.
You
Let's
can-
stop.
No,
Stop.
no, you need to know
Girls,
before you put
this is
out,
over.
You need to be sure of the facts. Loads of people are blind and they don't have new lenses put on.
Darling, if you have the chance to have the cataract in your eye fixed, take the chance. That's it.
After I've discussed it with them, what are
Don't
the
discuss
what
it with
what
anybody.
are? Come
I've
on,
done
give me
some
the
work.
facts.
Turn off these fucking cameras, would you? For Jesus' sake, girls.
Lilia, I need to know the statistics. How many operations have there been? How many have been successful?
There have been about 40 billion operations.
You're making that up.
No, I'm making that up because
Of that
it's
40
probably
billion, what
less.
percentage were successful?
Now, you've just been through a fucking war in the north of Ireland. You've just been through vulnerable times. You're a vulnerable woman. You're old, like me.
I'm only 75. I've my mortgage paid off.
Until the battle of the sexes has finally become unknown. Until nature has stopped being treated as the enemy of man. When comfort is no longer mistaken for culture and beauty becomes a need again. We are the ones who will not stay quiet.